We're back for another deep dive, and today we're doing a case update. Remember that really tragic case in Chicago with Officer Enrique Martinez, who was shot and killed during a traffic stop on November 4th. We've got some new information here. Some of it comes from Fox 32 Chicago, and there are some really shocking details coming out.
There are new details tonight in the murder of a Chicago police officer.
The 23-year-old is now facing charges in connection with the deadly shooting. Tia Ewing has been following this story. She joins us now live with the latest. Tia.
Well, Don and Scott, we actually just got his mugshot, and it's very interesting. We'll show it to you here shortly, but let's talk about what we've learned. 23-year-old Darion McMillian was already a convicted felon, and now he's facing 6 felony counts. One, obviously, for attempted murder of the officer that he dragged when he tried to get away from the scene. He's also facing first-degree murder charges for the killing of 26-year-old Chicago police officer Enrique Martinez. And let's show you that mugshot that I was just talking about. We just learned yesterday of McMillian's long criminal history. The 23-year-old has been arrested for unlawful possession of a weapon and has a pending case out of Will County for possessing and manufacturing cannabis. Months ago, he tried cheating on his drug test on October 16th. That's when he was placed on an electronic monitoring, and an ankle monitor was put on out of Will County. McMillian was the passenger in the stopped car Monday night in the 8000 block of South Ingleside. When Officer Enrique Martinez and his partner approached the car, McMillian was reaching into a bag, and that's when the suspect pulled out a gun modified with a switch on it, able to fire off multiple rounds in just seconds.
Let's dive right in. So, for example, the suspect, Darion McMillian, was wearing an ankle monitor at the time of the shooting. This really makes you think. It adds a whole other layer to this case, right? Was this a failure of the system? What could have been done to prevent this? It raises some really tough questions about how effective these monitoring systems are and how we handle repeat offenders. We'll definitely get into all of that, but first, let's get everyone up to speed on what we know so far. Rewind back to November 4th. Officers pulled over a vehicle for a routine traffic stop on the south side of Chicago. As the officers approached, someone inside the car opened fire. Officer Martinez and a passenger were both shot. It's just an awful, sudden escalation of violence. It's scary and really highlights the dangers that law enforcement officers face every day. It's a chilling reminder of the risks they take. In this case, it cost Officer Martinez his life. He was only 26 years old, engaged, and came from a family dedicated to law enforcement. His own brother is on the force. It's devastating to hear. And we can't forget about the passenger in the car either, who was also killed. We still don't know their name. It's just an awful situation. Now, after the shooting, McMillian, who's 23 years old, tried to drive away, hit another officer with a vehicle, then abandoned the car and tried to escape on foot, but he was eventually caught. Despite all that chaos, he was apprehended pretty quickly. This is just the beginning, though. The charges against him are very serious. First-degree murder of a police officer, first-degree murder for the passenger, attempted murder of a police officer for hitting that officer with the car, residential burglary, unlawful use of a weapon, specifically a machine gun, and aggravated unlawful use of a weapon by a felon. Wow. And this is where that ankle monitor detail comes back in, right? It suggests a prior criminal history, for one. How could someone who's being monitored be in a position to do something like this? It definitely seems like a potential failure of the system somewhere. That's what the investigation is trying to figure out. The Civilian Office of Police Accountability, COPA, is leading the charge. They're looking into everything, including body camera footage and witness testimonies. The officers involved have been placed on administrative duty while that happens, which is pretty standard procedure. It's important that they do a thorough and impartial investigation. This is a case with a ton of public interest. People are really upset about this, and there's lots of grief and support for the family and the police department. It's just a powerful reminder that behind the badge, there's a human being. Officer Martinez had loved ones and dreams. He dedicated his life to service. His death has really touched people. It's heartbreaking, especially for his family and fiancée. This case really brings that to the forefront. Beyond the emotional impact of all this, there are some important legal developments we should talk about. The Illinois State Police and Mayor Brandon Johnson both made statements. They expressed their condolences. Mayor Johnson's statement was especially powerful. He vowed that justice would be served for Officer Martinez's family, for the city, and for the Chicago Police Department. He also talked about the risks that police officers take every day and the importance of their work to keep Chicago safe. It sounds like he's trying to find that balance, acknowledging the tragedy, the need for accountability, but also supporting the police during this difficult time. Another thing from the reports, 2 guns were found at the scene. Immediately, that raises some questions. Who did they belong to? Were they both fired? Did McMillian have both of them? Were they legally obtained? Lots of questions for sure. That's what investigators will be looking at as they try to figure out what happened. And of course, we still have that ankle monitor detail. It adds another layer of complexity, making you wonder what McMillian was doing that night. Why was he wearing the ankle monitor in the first place? Maybe it was for a previous offense, a violent one even. It's possible. Investigators will definitely be digging into his past. So, we've got a suspect with a potential history of violence, 2 guns, and a tragic loss of life. This is a lot to process. It really speaks to bigger issues like gun violence and repeat offenders. These problems affect so many communities. This case is just one example. It's important to remember that this isn't an isolated incident. This is a systemic issue that we need to address as a society.
After noticing McMillian in the front passenger seat reaching for a bag on the floor of the vehicle, Officer Martinez and his partner gave verbal direction for McMillian to stop reaching. At this point, McMillian produced a fully automatic handgun equipped with a machine gun conversion device and an extended magazine, and fired in the direction of Officer Martinez, fatally striking him. The driver of the vehicle was also fatally struck multiple times by McMillian's gunfire. The weapon was recovered inside the vehicle.
Martinez was driven to the hospital by his fellow officers, but sadly died. McMillian pushed the driver of the car he was in out of the driver's seat, and that's when he dragged that officer. That officer discharged 1 bullet into the ground. He was injured, but we are told he will be okay. As for McMillian, he then took off on foot. He then broke into a woman's house and removed his ankle monitor. He cut it off with a knife. He was quickly caught just a few blocks away, and there was a 3rd suspect inside of that vehicle when all of this happened. That person was in the rear seat of the vehicle. I am told that that person was released without any charges. The Chicago Police Department saying that that person had nothing to do with the officer's death. Now, as for McMillian, he will be inside a courtroom tomorrow morning at 11:30 over at Layton Criminal Courthouse. And of course, we will be there. Live tonight, Tia Ewing, Fox 32, Chicago.
The Civilian Office of Police Accountability, or COPA, is an independent agency. They're not part of the Chicago Police Department. They investigate allegations of police misconduct, including shootings and things like that. This ensures that things are objective in these sensitive cases. They have the authority to look into all the evidence, including body camera footage, to see if the officers followed the right procedures during the traffic stop and everything leading up to the shooting. They want to know if the use of force was justified. This is really important for accountability and transparency, especially in a case that's getting so much attention. The public reaction has been pretty huge. There's a lot of grief and support for Officer Martinez's family and the police department. It's a reminder that there's a human being behind the badge. Officer Martinez had a family and dreams, and his whole life was about service. This case has really hit people hard. It's a reminder that these officers are people too, risking their lives every day to protect us. Now, besides all the emotion, there are some legal things we should talk about. The Illinois State Police and Mayor Brandon Johnson both made statements. They both gave their condolences. Mayor Johnson's statement was really something. He said they would make sure justice is served for Officer Martinez's family, for the city, and for the entire police department. He also talked about the dangers these officers face every single day and how important their work is to keeping Chicago safe. It's a tough spot to be in, and you can see that in his words. Another thing from the reports, 2 guns were recovered at the scene. Immediately, that raises more questions. Who did they belong to? Were they both used in the shooting? Were they legally obtained? These are all things investigators will be looking into. And then we have that whole ankle monitor thing too. It makes you wonder what was going on before the traffic stop. What was McMillian doing? Why was he wearing a monitor? Maybe it was for something else he did, maybe something violent even. Investigators will be looking into his past for sure. So, we've got this suspect with a potentially violent history, 2 guns, and a tragic death. This is a lot. It really is. And it makes you think about the bigger picture. Gun violence, repeat offenders. These problems affect so many communities. This case just brings it all to light. It's important not to get lost in the details of this one case. This is a systemic problem we need to figure out how to fix. It makes you think about the challenges law enforcement faces, especially with repeat offenders. It's a tough question. How do you keep people safe while also protecting individual rights? How do you help people who have committed crimes turn their lives around? How do we stop something like this from happening again? It's complicated, for sure. Like I said before, it's like peeling back the layers of an onion. The more we learn, the more questions come up. Like what happened right before the shooting? What was McMillian thinking? Why did he open fire? These are the big questions. And that's what COPA is trying to figure out. They'll be going through all the evidence, including the body camera footage. Body cameras are so important in cases like this. They show what really happened from a neutral perspective and help figure out if the officers were justified in using force. It can back up what witnesses say and show how things played out. In this case, where there are a lot of strong emotions, it's important to have that unbiased evidence. It's not just about who's guilty or innocent. It's about understanding everything that happened and making sure everyone is held accountable. Then there's the legal side of things for McMillian. Those are some serious charges. The outcome is going to affect a lot of people, especially those first-degree murder charges. They're really serious. Basically, with first-degree murder, they're saying it was planned, that McMillian thought about it and decided to kill Officer Martinez and the passenger. That means the punishment could be a lot worse compared to, say, second-degree murder, which is more like a crime of passion. So there's a big difference between those. They have to prove that he went in with a plan to kill. They'll have to show evidence that he meant to do it, like if he made threats before or said something or anything that shows he thought about it beforehand. This whole case is going to be tough. It's going to be a challenge for the investigation and the courts. While all that's going on, there's a whole community that's grieving, a family that's lost someone they love. It's important to remember the human cost of this tragedy. Officer Martinez's death is a reminder of the sacrifices law enforcement makes to protect us all. Behind the badge, there's a real person. As we learn more about this case and what led to it, we should remember the people who are suffering and have conversations about how to make things safer for everyone. It's been a lot to process in this deep dive. This case is heartbreaking, and it makes you think. It's definitely one that will stick with us. It's a reminder that these aren't just stories in the news. These are real people, real lives, and the effects of something like this reach far and wide. We want to encourage everyone to stay informed about this case and think about the bigger questions it raises. What can we do to stop these tragedies from happening again? How do we support law enforcement and hold them accountable at the same time? These are tough questions, but they're important ones to think about if we want to make things better. So, keep those questions in mind. Keep learning. Keep asking questions. Until next time, stay curious and keep searching for the truth.